Welcome back to these segments about how cloud and digital technology is really changing and posing a real challenge, but also great opportunities for those that work in local government and local public services. If you remember in the first segment, I outlined why local government and public services can be considered a legacy organisation, because many of their people, processes and technology functions and activities are now increasingly redundant and not really of any public value anymore in the digital era. And in this next section, I'm going to develop that insight for you and try and build an understanding of what that really means. So this is, if you like, a piece of futurology. I'm going to really try and outline for you what that opportunity looks like. First, in this segment, in terms of huge efficiencies, which will liberate enormous amounts of budget for the front line. And in the next segment, I'm going to do a next piece of futurology and talk about innovation. So we're going to focus now on how cloud, emerging tech, digital technologies, and the internet in general pose enormous opportunities for you in local government to achieve massive efficiencies. Okay, I often introduce this topic with a blog that I wrote 3 or 4 years ago, and it introduces the concept of focus and leverage. And you can see from this slide that let's imagine that you were attending a pitch. Okay, and you are pitching your new idea to an audience. How are they going to judge whether your new idea is any good? And you might be a policymaker, you might be a technology entrepreneur, it doesn't really matter. How can you decide whether somebody's idea for a new project or initiative is any good? In the olden days, before the internet, you might have had a range of criteria to evaluate what they proposed to focus on, how good the focus of their idea is and whether it was valuable or not. Have they done their research? Do you find them professional? Do they inspire confidence? And in the digital era, those focus criteria still apply, but there is a new criterion, what I call leverage. Because you're going to want to hear, let's say I'm pitching to you, you're going to want to hear from me about my focus, what I propose to concentrate on doing and what I propose to spend public money on, but you also want to hear how I'm going to avoid wasting a lot of that public money reinventing the wheel. How I'm going to turbocharge the services I'm providing using some of the emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, robotic process automation, advanced analytics, and other enterprise-grade technologies that really amplify what we can do, how we can understand our customers, how we can save money, and how we can use a lot of those cloud-based services, if you like, to do the heavy lifting at the back end. And you probably want to hear how, once I'd considered those things, I then went back and modified my proposed focus, my proposed service, if you like, or investment. So how I've been round focus and leverage quite a bit so that I don't waste public money on things really that we can consume a little bit like Google. So let's bring focus and leverage to life a little bit. If you bought one of those Jaguars about 17, 18 years ago, you'd have actually been buying a Ford Focus, because at that time Jaguar was owned by Ford, and actually they had a bit of an idea, and they thought, well, our customers really care, Jaguar customers care about the shiny paintwork and the large engine maybe, and they might like the quality of the internal cabin, but they don't really care about for example, who made the wire that connects the speedometer with the engine. Do you really care about who made the wire that connects the speedometer to the engine any more than your customers care, as I mentioned in the last segment, about which customer relationship management system their council uses? They don't care, providing it works. So there's some things that a person buying a Jaguar does care about, and there's something that they don't care about. So basically, Ford reused many Ford Focus parts in this Jaguar. So you thought you're buying a Jaguar, but in fact the bits they don't care about, they reuse from other vehicles that they're making. Which was all went very well until a motoring journalist took one of these cars out for a test drive and noticed, of course, that some of the switchgear in the dashboard was exactly the same as the switchgear in a Ford Focus that he had tested the day before, which was, of course, bad luck for Ford Jaguar. But actually, I argue that this represented a really good management principle of focus and leverage. Because, of course, Ford then discovered that customers do care about having nice switchgear specific to a Jaguar and not a Ford, and therefore they decided, of course, in future editions of the car to include switchgear in the focus part. So customized, bespoking, expensive Jaguar switches, okay, because that wasn't part of the leverage along with the wire that connects the dashboard to the engine, or maybe some of the internal components of the engine itself. It was something that their customers really cared about. What are the things that your customers in local services really care about? And really in your organization, what are the things they don't care about? And of course, the market itself is evolving to cater for standard ways of consuming things that your customers don't really care about. So this is one example. This is Amazon's Alexa. Now, if you think Alexa is a sort of smart speaker thing that sits in your desk, well, think again, because I think of Alexa really as being code. So Amazon, for example, is hoping that many motoring organizations will include Alexa code that recognizes, of course, your speech and things that you're asking for and provides and connects that to the internet. They're hoping that cars will build that as a default service into automobiles, for example, so that rather than building their own version of that in cars, the automobiles just consume Amazon's Alexa service. Here's another example, Microsoft. This is, of course, the Microsoft community website begging people, if you're a developer, to come and build Microsoft's code into their services. Rather than trying to invent them themselves, they're saying, just come and use our stuff. You can have free code libraries and support and training and technology, because the market is evolving to provide these services and evolving very quickly. And here's a nice example, I would argue, taken from the private sector, of digital service design on this principle of focus and leverage. So this is WISE, used to be called TransferWise. It's for transferring money across international boundaries. So I think it's a beautiful piece of digital service design. Why? Because I'm presented, as you can see here, with if I type in, I don't know, 100 UK pounds, I can see how much of that money is going to arrive in the home currency of the person that I'm sending it to. In other words, I can see how much of a commission WISE is taking, and I can also compare their products and services to the broader market. So nice and simple, intuitive, tells me what I want to know. Nice piece of digital service design. And of course, one of the reasons that WISE is able to do this is because they are not wasting their time and energy trying to build the back-end mechanics, a bit like the Jaguar and Ford example. They're not wasting their time and budget trying to rebuild the back end for this service. Because if we look at how WISE is built at the back end, it's actually built on something called Currency Cloud, which is a white label payments platform that can be used by anybody that wants to build it into the back end of its service. All of which, of course, means that if you are a legacy organization, like Western Union, for example, which has been around for nigh on 100 years, you should be quite worried. And I don't think this is a nice example of digital service design, because in contrast, it doesn't offer me information about the service, about what the person will receive at the other end. It doesn't allow me to compare their offering with the broader market. And in fact, I can't get anything from it before I give them my details and sign up. So if I was Western Union, a little bit like my challenge to you as leaders in local public services, I would be very worried about how new services, such as WISE, which are operating on the basis of focus, this is their focus, and this is their leverage, are able to deliver better, more joined up services for much lower cost. And these better services and much lower cost are the real challenges for all of you working in local public services in the digital era. So how do we get there? And you might think, well, gosh, is the answer to have lots of digital teams and post-it notes and agile ceremonies and start building stuff? Is that really going to be the answer? Because often digital teams kind of say this is the answer. I have a different perspective on this. There's nothing wrong with that kind of activity, but actually there are other ways in which we can do it. If you are a central legislator, I would argue actually a central bill that helps the whole collective public services to come together by saying to everybody, if you're a chief executive of a local organisation, we're going to take away your power to waste public funds on reinventing the wheel, and we're going to provide that for you centrally. And there's an example of how that might work. That's obviously not going to happen in most countries for whatever political reasons there are. So that's a high-level way of doing it. A middle way of doing it is in the UK. We have tried something called Local Digital Declaration, and this is a website that says lots of councils, over 300 councils, have come together and they started to share things. Technology upgrade plans, business strategies, code libraries. They've started just anything that they can leverage together, that there is no value about having their own version of every time. They're starting to come and share together as a collective. And then, of course, governments are also able to build some of these principles into their transformation strategy. I had some input into this one a few years ago. As you can see here, it explicitly says we're going to start to share things together rather than actually build them every time. Here's an example that one of the businesses that I used to run, a little piece of work we did for the Scottish Government that wanted to think, okay, so what is the opportunity of starting to share these things rather than build them every time? Here is an example procurement, a public procurement that they said, look, we're going to start to acknowledge that a lot of these functions, as you can see here, are duplicated again and again and again. So rather than duplicate them again, we're going to start to identify what we've all got in common that we can use the internet and cloud technology to share. There's an actual example for you of a government procurement. And the study we did was, well, how many agencies in Scotland do licensing and registration functions? Yeah, and you can see all these silos. So we noticed actually that almost every licensing and registration you apply for in Scotland goes through the same service pattern. Discovery, do I need a license for this? Routing, where can I get one? Eligibility, am I eligible for it? Suitability, I may be eligible, but am I going to be awarded it? And finally issuing the license. They all do this again and again and again. And underneath that, there are these shared capabilities that I will come back to in later segments. You can see examples, take payment, provide information. These basic Lego bricks, building blocks of services that are repeated again and again. And you can then start to actually build up a map of all of your digital services. You can see here the example. On the left, we have book an appointment, take a payment, issue proof, etc., etc. And you can check off the duplication of these again and again and again across all of your vertical silos. So a way in local services of tackling some of the objections that you're going to hear to this, where people say, we're special here. We don't want to consume standard things at the back end because we're special. Here is an example in the UK and other places of something called Heart FM. So Heart FM is a radio station, and there are lots of regional radio stations with local DJs, local advertisers, local traffic, local chit-chat and gossip, local weather, local things for local people. Except, of course, all of these local radio stations consume a common back end of common services, because when I listen to the radio station, I don't care about the technology components in the back end. So to conclude this segment then, this is how we're organised. Into all of these silos, they don't communicate with each other, and of course they rebuild again and again and again. Lots of things that there is no value of rebuilding. And instead we have to look at and think a little bit like this, and this draws from a very great video by a chap called Mark Foden called The Gubbins of Government. So at the top, our services have levers and dials, that's websites and ways that citizens interact with us, call centres, etc. At the bottom, just basic pipes and wires and machinery and infrastructure. We're not interested in those really. The most important bit is this bit he calls gubbins. So back to my focus and leverage. Where do you add value? Where is it valuable for you to build your own things? That's specific gubbins. And where, in contrast, actually can you start to reuse those common building blocks that I illustrated just now, which he calls common gubbins, and thinking through your organisation to separate those out, the levers and dials which have to be personalised, the specific gubbins, the things that you really need to build, versus all of the rest of that stuff that frankly it is a waste of public money to keep rebuilding and duplicating. And that's really the challenge for you. And just my final slide in the segment, here's an example of that kind of thinking. So my own local government, I live next to my councillor for technology. And he said to me a few years ago, he said, we have been quoted £100,000 to rebuild our website. Is that a lot of money or is it a little bit of money? How much, is it a good quote or not? And we just did some thinking along the lines that I've been discussing. We actually went to a bar and had a couple of beers and just talked through it. And as a result of applying this principle of focus and leverage, you can see here on this slide reported by the press, but basically our council, our local government website costs us £150 a year. Not £100,000, £150 a year. So that's the kind of results practically you could get by applying this kind of thinking. Thanks very much.